We are back for the first build episode of the F40 for 2026, and this is a big one. You'll notice the rear clamshell is off the car for the very first time, and that is because I have just finished up running all 4 rear chassis rails. The main structure for the back of this car is officially in place, and we are now going to move on to designing rear suspension pickup points. We've got some custom suspension jigging back here. This is a big one, but that's not all we're going to do in this episode. The front of the car is actually getting close to wrapped up as far as major work goes, because this is now front suspension bolted to the chassis, because we have designed, cut, assembled, and tacked all of the front suspension mounts to this thing. This is a massive milestone. This was a ton of work. This took weeks to kind of figure out, solve, decide how I want to do it, but it's here, and now we just get to transpose this to the back of the car in the next episode. Tons of work in this one, and that's something I want to follow through on for 2026. I want as many F40 episodes as I can and as much progress as possible, because here in the next handful of weeks, this car might actually be on its wheels and kind of rolling, so to speak, for the very first time. Don't get me wrong, there's a long way to go, but this is the best episode we have yet. Let's get into it. Now, if somehow you're new here, let me catch you up to speed. Here at StanceWorks, we're building an F40, but it's not any F40. It's a one-off tube chassis V12 powered F40 that's using as many parts from Ferrari as we can muster. However, we've tossed out anything that's old and antiquated, and in its place, we're building the best car possible. And we're starting with the chassis. This chassis is built almost entirely from Docal R8 steel, which is a specialty motorsport-specific grade tubing that is meant to make for both a very rigid and very lightweight chassis. Our current goal is to transpose modern Ferrari 458 Challenge Evo centerlock hubs and suspension onto this chassis so that it drives like a new Ferrari as opposed to one from the 1980s. Now, these big steel plates that we see here are not permanent. They're simply fixtures that we're using to locate parts and pieces, and today we're going to scan all of the progress that we've made on this car, transpose it into Fusion 360, and then start designing the mounts for the suspension itself. And if that sounds confusing, well, I would suggest going back and watching our previous episodes because I've covered every single step of the process so far. All right, maybe there are some gaps that I should fill in for an explanation. If you're wondering why we're going to scan this chassis if we're doing a lot of this work in CAD already, well, the answer is hopefully simple. The goal here is to make sure that everything we've built in real life matches our CAD file down to the millimeter. I don't want to spend days designing suspension pickup points, only to then go put them on the chassis after having them laser cut and have them not fit. By doing it this way, we can make sure that everything we have in our CAD file matches real life exactly. With the front of the car scanned, now we got to take this file and bring it into Fusion 360. And this, while it doesn't look like much, is all of the mesh data that we're going to need to convert this into a model. It's important to think of 3D scan data like tracing paper. With it, we're able to lay in and model the chassis rails of the car over top of that mesh data so that we actually have something to work with. The mesh file itself isn't very useful. With this stuff drawn into place, I can then also add in the jig that we built in some of the earlier episodes, and I can overlay it all to make sure it's all lined up one-to-one as it is in the CAD file and real life. Now, I know that this is about to be a draw the rest of the owl moment, but I spent several days modeling until I finally landed on this solution to mount the suspension to the chassis. All of this stuff is boxed sheet metal steel with some threaded slugs that will pass through the mounts for the control arms to bolt to. Now, if this is confusing to look at, I'm going to show you all the parts and pieces here in a moment, but in order to have those parts and pieces, we've got to send these drawings off to our friends at Send Cut Send. Now, Send Cut Send has a lot of services they offer, including CNC machining, but in this case, all of this is laser cut flat pack steel. I had them do all the folding and the alignment, so this stuff should in some ways just kind of fit on the car, if all of my CAD measurements and scan data are accurate, and as you'll see, it all works out pretty well. Even with this though, there's still some assembly required, so let's talk about how we're actually going to pull this off. I'm going to be honest, over the weekend, I did that thing where I work a little bit while Anthony's not here to film, because I kind of wanted to figure out the lay of the land and make sure I know exactly what I'm doing and I have a system down so I don't take forever to film this stuff. And so what I have here is one lower portion welded together of one mount, and that gives you an idea of what we're actually going to try to build right now. These are the side plates, and then this is the halfway constructed mount. I can't weld it all the way together because the top part will box this in, and once it's boxed in, obviously it could not get slid over the tube. So this will get welded in situ, but that's not a big deal. I purposely welded the bottom first because that'll be a lot harder to get to, a lot harder to weld. Top, no big deal. So we're gonna make this, we're gonna do this for the driver's side of the car. So let's talk about these two plates. I probably covered some of this already, but let's talk about these two plates. This is going to be the, let's call it, outside of the car. When I designed it, this was the inside. I was just gonna weld between these mounts, and I wasn't gonna have our kind of stanchion tubes cross through the tube in the car, but I've come up with a way to do that. I'm gonna show you a mag drill later. And so as a result, I'm actually gonna put this on the outside of the car. This is gonna go towards the inside, and we're gonna put a mag drill on this surface later and use this as the guide to drill all the way through the chassis and then through this plate, and it'll all line up, hopefully. So we'll take both of these guys. We'll use some of our Fireball Tools shims and 1, 2, 3 blocks, get it all kind of squared up here on the table, and let's weld it together. Let's see what it's gonna look like on the car. As mentioned, I put one of these together already to refine the process, and here's how it all went together. When it comes to multi-piece sheet metal parts like this, it's really easy to suffer from a lot of distortion as you get them hot and welded into a single part. So our primary goal is to prevent as much of that distortion as possible. It's not really doable to prevent all of it, but we're going to do our best, and to do that, we're going to employ several different tricks. I've got the parts clamped to the table, and I'm using squares to keep all of the edges of the part in line with each other. I'm also using shims to keep the two main halves of the part equidistant all the way down its length. Once we start welding, it would be really easy for the outsides to splay apart from each other, or for them to shrink inwards depending on how we weld it. In my opinion, it's best to get as much welding done on the workbench as possible so that we save ourselves the effort once the parts are on the car. But for most of the stuff, 90% of it is going to happen in situ on the F40 chassis. Now we have both upper control arm mounts boxed in and ready to be fitted to the chassis. And as mentioned, these are going to get located with these threaded inserts that I had machined across the street over at Les & Brett's. These threaded inserts are what the control arms will physically bolt to, but if we bolt these to the suspension jigs, they will in turn locate the mounts exactly where they need to be. So, that's step number 1. Put the mounts on the chassis, and then use the threaded inserts and the suspension jigs to get everything positioned in the right place. With that, the upper mount is officially in place exactly where it needs to be, and I need to sort out the cap. For that, I've actually bought a new tool for the shop. Some of you will remember the old Ryobi belt sander I've been using since I started the first Ferrari build on this channel, and it finally bit the dust. Well worth the $100 it cost 5 years ago. But at this point, I decided it was worth getting an upgrade, so I bought this huge Grizzly belt sander, and it seems much more up to the task of the level of fabrication we're doing here in this shop. I'm excited to put it to work. Now let's turn our attention to the lower control arm mounts for a moment. These are made from those box structures you saw arrive from SendCut Send, and they're designed to fit directly to the chassis, but they do need a little bit of trimming to account for things like material thickness. That and accounting for things like I might not be that great at CAD work, but I'm doing my best, okay? The idea here is to clearance these parts until the threaded studs line up with the suspension jig. We'll remove as little material as possible so that all of our gaps are nice and tight, but again, everything does have to line up at a very specific point. But man, is it satisfying when it finally clicks and lands perfectly into place. Once those threaded holes are lined up, we know we are done. As mentioned, we'll get these tightened as much as possible, and with that, we know that it's all locked perfectly into place. Everything is right where it needs to be. But of course, I want to double and triple check everything. I want to use a level to make sure that these parts are level and square to the table and to the jigs, so that nothing is going to be off and crooked once we get further down the line. That would be worst case scenario. Okay, so I've got this side's mounts completely into place. At this point, all that's left, I'm gonna tack this guy into place, the bottom of this tube, and then we're gonna pull this mount out, probably pull this one too. I gotta weld all the way around it so that it's welded underneath the suspension mount, and then we'll go on and we'll tack all these into place. And I gotta decide how much welding I'm gonna do now versus later. I'm really thinking it's probably smart just to tack everything, but I also kind of want to just send it and get it welded on, you know? So we'll see. We'll tack it all together first. That's a smart thing to do. Honestly, that's one of the biggest challenges I've had to overcome as a fabricator, to not get ahead of myself. Once I'm in the zone, I just want to weld things into place. I'm there, I'm excited, and it feels like progress. But I've learned the hard way that more likely than not, I might have to make some changes or adjustments later. And so right now, the responsible move is to just tack things into place so that we can always undo it until a later time. Part of that is because we're always having to think a number of steps ahead and then work backwards from them. The perfect example of that right now is the fact that in order for me to weld around the base of these tubes that I just mentioned a moment ago, I have to remove the jig plates from the chassis table. They're blocking my access for welding. To remove the jig plates, we have to cut this entire thing apart, which means this is the point of no return. We can't go back to this point. But we still need these jig plates because we haven't even tacked all the suspension mounts into place. So what I've done is tacked the upper mounts into place to relocate the jig plates once we want to put them back. And if that doesn't make sense, I'm sorry. I'm doing my best to explain this convoluted mess of 3 steps forward, 4 steps back, rinse and repeat. Right now, the goal is to get the jigs out of the way so I can completely weld the base of these tubes because they will be completely encapsulated by the sheet metal lower control arm mounts, and we won't have access to do this later, and I'm certainly not going to just partially weld these tubes. It needs to be finished completely and thoroughly. When it comes to welding this tube work, well, it should be relatively straightforward, but it's not necessarily easy to access with the chassis table and other chassis structure in the way. But instead of complaining about it, I'll just let Anthony's camera work do the talking. Okay, so let's call this part done. The joint of the chassis between the lower control arm mounts is fully welded and ready to be encapsulated by the mounts themselves. There's a bit of work involved and a lot of measuring to make sure the jigs are back in their original position, but once they're locked into place once again, it's time to install those lower mounts for a final time. From here, I'm going to be responsible and just tack everything into place in case I need to move it in the future. But I'm going to keep my fingers crossed that that's not going to happen and that these are in their final resting place. Okay, so now I've got all the mounts tacked into place, and I'm fighting with myself because I really want to go on and just start laying some welds so I know they don't go anywhere because I want to bolt suspension to it, but I think the smart move here is to leave everything tacked, bolt all the suspension to it, and make sure that it all works the way that it's supposed to in case we got to cut all this stuff off and redo it here in a couple months or something. So I think at this point, I'm going to call all this stuff locked in position. I need to remake the cap for this side. I messed it up a little bit and have a cut in the wrong spot, so we're going to leave that one off for now. And I still need to fit the caps for the lower boxes, get everything all boxed in, but again, until we're actually welding everything into place, there's not a reason to do that. So now, I think what I'm going to do is cut the jigs cross braces out of the front side and the bottom of the back so that they will come off, which is kind of scary because I definitely don't want to weld these mounts into position without the jig here to hold it where it needs to be. Anything could move while we're welding, and that would be bad. So what I mentioned earlier, I think I'm going to reorder these guys in aluminum so I don't have to deal with the rust. I'm going to hog some holes out in the middle so I can kind of have some more access for welding because I want to weld as much of this stuff as possible with the jig holding it in place. And it won't be rusty. It'll look a lot better. And I think I'm going to make them bolt together with a pretty good tolerance fit so that I can remove and put them back on as needed. And the dog's now got some French fries, so we got to stop there. Frank! I've got to admit that as I've been editing this and watching it back, I've kind of explained everything so far multiple times over, and if you're still here, I'm sorry about it. But the good news is, I don't have to do that anymore. We're going to cut these jig plates out of the way and start making forward progress for the rest of the episode. From here, it's all about actually fitting suspension pieces into place. And while I don't want to make a big deal out of what is a small milestone, this feels huge. Because this is the first time in a long time that we've actually seen the front end of this chassis without plates in the way, and it's the first time we've had suspension mounts tacked into place. I don't know if it's clear yet, but this means it's time to bolt suspension onto the car for the very first time. Now, we don't have dampers, nor do we have damper mounts, but this will be all 4 front control arms and the uprights in place exactly where they need to be. I'm also hopeful that whatever piss poor job I've done so far of explaining how all these pieces and parts actually work, that seeing it in place starts to make it all make sense. Now you can actually visualize how the control arms bolt to the mounts, how these threaded standoffs actually work, and why everything is shaped the way that it is. Next on the list for the front end is a steering rack. After that, damper mounts, and then the front end can actually sit on its own weight. So we're going to work quickly towards that as our goal sometime in the next month. But for now, let's talk about the tail end of the car. This is a simplified, stripped-down version of the CAD file for our F40 chassis. Ignore all of the gray framework, that's the original F40 design. Right now, I want to look at the yellow fixturing here at the back of the car, and more importantly, the new teal plates I have on each end of it. You'll see these red tubes passing from the front to the back of the car through these teal plates. These red tubes represent a simple version of all 4 frame rails that will support everything at the back of the car. They pass through these teal plates in order to make sure that they are perfectly straight and square with one another. And so I took these teal plate designs, sent them over to Send Cut Send, and now we have them on hand. They're going to bolt to this rear suspension jig so that we can build this whole structure. And just like that, we get to fast forward. Parts are here. And it actually happened pretty quick because I used Send Cut Send's Rush feature and got this. I think I ordered this on, it might have been Saturday, and it's here now. And today's Tuesday, so pretty quick. With that said, I'm excited because this means we get to start on our rear chassis rails. I get to keep Anthony behind the camera fed. That's all he gets to eat. But he likes them. Keeps them in a good mood. Look at them. They're beautiful. I'm stoked. Let's open them up. My relationship with Send Cut Send started with me being an actual retail customer, and it's one of the most powerful tools I have in my toolbox. I encourage you guys to try it out, and if you head to sendcutsend.com/StanceWorks, you can get 15% off your next order, and you'll have parts that look professionally made just like mine. Now with these, there's no real fabrication that we're going to have to do. You guys saw the model. You hopefully know how they work, but all it's going to take is bolting these to the back and the front side of our rear suspension jigs, and then we're going to use these holes to kind of get the position of all four rear frame rails absolutely perfect, and most importantly, parallel to each other. That's something I really want. I want to make sure that all the suspension geometry works well. Frank's taking apart that packaging right now. He's putting in work on it. He's helping out. I just want to make sure that all of the rear rails are perfect, because if they're not, and I'm doing it kind of freestyle by hand, I think you'll see it when it's done. So these are going to help us get it lined up. Let's get these bolted into place, and then I think it might actually be time to remove the rear clamshell for the first time, because I don't really want to fabricate with it in place. And so, for the first time since this project began, the rear clamshell is coming off the chassis table. To do that, we've got to unbolt it from the roof skin, which is currently held in place by the roll cage itself. This is a bit of a balancing act, and I think some of you guys might freak out if you saw how precariously balanced some of this stuff was, but that can be our secret. There's a part of me that wants to leave the rear clamshell in place as we build the rear structure of this car, but because I know how many times the tube work's going to have to come in and out, I know it's going to be way easier to do it with nothing in our way. Now we have much easier access to bolt these new plates into place. Alright, so we got the jig in place, and now, if you couldn't figure out how it worked before, hopefully it'll make sense. This is how it will hold the tube. Tube slides through both of these. We'll actually put all four segments of tube in place and measure exactly where we want them to bend, how much they're going to bend. We'll make measuring it nice and easy. And again, all this is going to do is just guarantee that as we put this whole thing together, that these four tubes at the back of the car are going to be parallel with each other and exactly in the same position, symmetric, right where the suspension pickup points need to be. Like, this is the way to do it. I'm excited about it. Should be maybe kind of relatively simple. Famous last words. Now, believe it or not, it's been an entire year since we started this project, and that means our Docal R8 tubing has been sitting around for just as long. And sitting in this shop, just half a mile from the ocean, means it's gonna collect some surface rust whether I want it to or not. So I'm whipping out the belt sander to get this thing all cleaned up before we start working with any of this material. Now, I will admit, and I've probably already touched upon this in other episodes, but this project's moving along a little bit slower than I originally anticipated. Our racing efforts with the 244 GTK took a lot more time, effort, and money than I expected. It pulled us off this project, and that means we're just now playing catch up and getting to where I thought we'd be many months ago. But as promised, I also want to make this project our focus this year. This thing is now the heart and soul of this channel, and I know it's what most people are here to see. We still have some stuff in store for the 244 GTK as well as some other projects, and I promise the Audi will get done this year, but the F40 is where my attention will be. On that note, back to this car. We now have 20 feet of tubing set in the jig at the back. It's all cleaned up and ready to figure out exactly where we want to bend it so we can get the back end of this car going. So now what I want to figure out is where I want to bend this tube. Here's where I'm going to start. It's going to come up, it's going to meet the back side of this joint here. I want the bend realistically probably as close to the jig as I can get it so that I have room back here for things like headers, engine mounts, if I make a cradle for the engine to drop down, all that type of stuff. The more room around the engine, the better. So, in order to do that, I need to figure out how much material I need past the jig so that I can put the bend in and get it where I need it to be. A little bit of math, not much. And then I also need to mark where from the end of the tube I'm putting that bend on each side so that I can make sure the bend falls in the same place side to side. And so that I, more importantly, because that's not hard to do, I want to make sure I don't mess up and kill, whatever this is, 6 feet of tube, because it would be very easy to accidentally move my cope too far down the tube and be in an irreversible mess with it. So let's get the bend protractor out, measure this thing, and throw some bends in it and hope that it all lines up where we want it to be. So as I'm trying to fit this into place, I think what actually might make the most sense is to pick an angle and then cope the tube to fit. So if you think about it, for the most part, there's a lot of different angles that would fit if I move this down the tube. We just add more angle to it or less angle to it. I want to bend reasonably close to this jig, as said. But I think the easiest way, I'm probably just going to go on and pick 35 degrees. We'll put the bend in the tube, and then we'll move the tube fore and aft on the chassis table until we get it right where we want it to be. And that'll be easier to make sure both sides are exactly the same, especially with the positioning of the bend itself. Now, the upper tubes at the back of this car thankfully slide into place, but what I didn't document is how much of a pain the lower tubes were. In order to get those into place, each and every time I wanted to adjust them, or even to change the cope on the end, I had to take apart the entire jig at the back end, because the parallel nature of it, plus all the tubes in the way at the front of the car, kept things from just going together. Kind of a pain, yes, but again, this also ensures the back of the car is going to be straight and parallel, and that's what's most important. It's worth the extra squeeze. Now, obviously, we want a chassis that is strong and rigid, but I'm also paying a lot of attention to the way that it looks. There are some subtle places where we get to make aesthetic choices instead of just engineering choices on how these tubes get laid out. For example, deciding where these bends actually land won't really affect the rigidity of the chassis, but I want it to look as good as possible. Details like this will really matter to me once this car's finished. Now, obviously, we will dive way more in depth on this in future episodes, but these 4 rear chassis rails represent the last major components that we need to design for the chassis itself. From here, it's going to be a lot of support and triangulation, but the tough part will be out of the way. We still need to design the floor of the car, and there will be lots of bits and pieces that extend out to the bodywork to support it. We'll have a lot of sheet metal work to do to close things in. But I do think that we are on the home stretch as far as tube work goes, and it's my hope that our pace on this project will begin to pick up, because from here moving forward, we will start to focus on the components that actually finish out the car. Right now, we have an engine, we have a gearbox on the way, we've got some suspension, but there's still an entire car's worth of systems that we need to begin mounting and integrating. Designing all of those mounts is going to be a ton of work, and of course we're still going to use Send Cut Send to do it because I want everything to have the same level of fit and finish. But figuring out where everything is going to go, such as fuel cells, fuel pumps, all the fuel line routing, where we mount things like the dry sump system and all of those components like oil coolers. We'll need to mount the radiator, water pump, and route all the coolant lines through the middle of the car. There's also systems like the brakes, the pedals, the steering. There's a lot of systems we need to start figuring out where they're going to go, how we're going to mount them, and integrating them into everything else. But I do think that's where these episodes are going to begin changing, and I'm hopeful you guys will enjoy that part of the process too. It will be less fabrication intense, and I think we'll begin to see a lot more progress in each episode as I work to try to put these out once a month throughout 2026. Maybe sometimes we'll get lucky, and in weeks where there's even more progress, we'll have them more frequently. But that's my goal for 2026, to put these episodes out once a month. I'm hopeful this episode was a good one. It represented a ton of work, most of which happened on the computer. That's why it's been so long since our last episode. But the upshot is I know exactly what's coming in the weeks ahead of us. Rear suspension mounts, the rest of our triangulation. I'd like to have most of this chassis wrapped up. All right, that is where I'm going to call this episode a wrap. Hopefully that was enough progress to satiate you guys. This one was a lot of work to get through, but as I said kind of at the beginning of the episode, I want to keep this pace up. I really want to focus on this car more than anything else this year. That's the main goal. For the next episode, I know what I need to be focused on. I'm going to work on all of our triangulation in the back end. I got a lot of tubes that I need to run, get into place so that the whole back end is capable of supporting its own weight. And then I want to go on and get our rear suspension mounts tacked to the thing. I got to design them, but basically emulate what we did in the front in the rear for the next episode so that we can bolt all four corners to the car for the first time, and that if we had wheels, tires, and dampers, it would be capable of rolling on its own. We won't have those parts yet, but conceptually, as far as progress goes, that's where I want to be next episode, and that's a big one. I hope you guys are enjoying this. As said, I want to focus on this project more than anything else this year. I also want to keep the behind-the-scenes stuff coming. I want to be more active on our Discord channel, and I want to be posting more to our Patreon. For those of you guys that are supporting us on Patreon, let me know what else you guys want to see. And if you aren't supporting us there yet, sign up. It gets you a handful of cool things. You get early access to all of our merchandise before it goes public and it sells out. You get behind-the-scenes photos and content. I'm going to be trying to update that way more frequently. And then most importantly, it gets you into the private lounge on our Discord server where I am active. I'm constantly chatting about what we're doing in the shop. I'm posting even more behind-the-scenes stuff and just showing day by day what we're doing. So come join us. Join on the fun. It's a good time. For those of you that do support us there, I'm actually going to start putting our big supporters here on screen at the end of these episodes. So thanks to these guys that do that. Thank you to everybody else for watching. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Thanks as always for the support.